Welcome back to another TapRooT podcast. This week we're going to be talking about the essentials of root cause analysis. So I brought with me an expert in root cause analysis. When we think about an investigation and doing root cause analysis, I think before we say what the essentials are, I think it's good to say why we would even start with root cause analysis. What's the purpose? Why would anybody think we need to be doing root cause analysis?
Or another thing, what are you trying to achieve when you do a root cause analysis? And then
what's the goal?
That varies somewhat, right?
Okay.
If you've had a fatality, why are you doing a root cause analysis?
Because we don't want to kill people anymore.
We don't want to kill them the same way anyhow.
All right.
And so we don't want to have a repeat of this incident. How about if it's a precursor incident or accident? So it's a precursor. By that I mean these same causal factors, same root causes could cause something much worse. This one didn't cause something.
We got lucky. Maybe some safeguard worked.
Yeah, exactly. But it could have been worse. Then, once again, you want to keep these causal factors or root causes from repeating again, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what about a quality one?
Don't want to send bad product.
So if you've sent bad product, you're doing it. But if you've caught something and you thought, oh, this could have been, once again, same kind of thing. You don't want those causal factors or root causes to repeat, and you don't want the thing to happen.
Okay. What about equipment failures?
Oh, gosh. So what would you want that equipment to fail again?
No.
Well, maybe. If it's a light bulb, it's okay. It burns out. You don't want to really do a root cause on that, right? But if it's something expensive, something that costs the plant some downtime, something that could injure somebody or cause unnecessary maintenance or damage, then once again, you want to prevent that from happening again. So a lot of times, no matter what the topic, you're trying to prevent things by removing the things that cause it. Now, you may also learn what? That your system is no good and you got to change the whole system, right? That's one of the examples of that would be that you've got some kind of hazardous chemical you're using, and you'd rather not use that hazardous chemical.
It's just too dangerous.
Yeah, and so therefore you change the process so that you have a more reliable or a different process that doesn't use that chemical, and therefore you can't have that accident. Once again, that case you're preventing it by removing the hazard.
So our goal is to find something that we can fix, that can change our systems, make these bad outcomes not happen again, or make these potentially bad outcomes be less likely to fail or likely to occur. So that's kind of our goal. We need to get an idea of what the outcome we're trying to prevent is. But is there something in common with all of these different bad outcomes?
Let's take a step back. So first thing is, if you've had something big go wrong, you know what the negative outcome is.
Yep.
If you've had something small go wrong, well, you have to sort of figure out what happened, and then you can say, could this cause something more serious to occur? So you're really then making a judgment, should I go on with root cause analysis or not? Is this a precursor incident, or is this something this is a light bulb that burned out and I'm not going to go investigate it anymore? Yeah. That's my standard example, the burnt out bulb.
So there's something that we're going to investigate. What are those essential elements that would make sure that we're able to understand and fix those problems? What's the things that we need to do? The essential elements.
To me, obviously, at least to start with, you have to understand what happened. If you don't understand what happened, how are you going to recommend fixes? Or I guess you could maybe, if you don't understand what happened, if you were going to say, well, let's just get rid of this whole process, you don't really need to understand what happened. But most of the time you have to understand what happened.
So why can't I start with why? Why is it that I need to understand what before why?
No, you first off, why is it? So let's say you start off your investigation by getting in a room with somebody and saying, why did you do that? Now, how do you approach that? How does that hit you when somebody asks, why did you do that?
I got a lot of reasons I'm going to come up with.
And it's blame oriented very much so. But if you say, hey, explain to me what happened, just step by step what happened and how things went, that isn't nearly as blame oriented as why. And so you really want to get your sequence of events, the things that happened that led to this, And I guess the first thing I'm thinking of is it's much better off if you're in a cooperative environment than a blame-oriented environment, because people are much more likely to tell you the real story versus a made-up story. And so you really want to understand what happened. You want them to feel at ease about it. You want them to know this is not a blame-oriented environment and that they're helping figure out a way to prevent these from happening in the future.
So would you say there's kind of two elements to this that we're talking about? There's one, which is understanding the what before the why, and the other is how do you reduce blame? And you need to reduce blame when you're doing root cause analysis.
You certainly don't want to cause blame while you're collecting your information. You don't want people to become like, oh gosh, what are they doing? Why am I? Oh, I'm not going to tell this guy anything. He's
why am I in the hot seat?
Yeah, I'm in the hot seat. I'm not going to. And it may not be, maybe I didn't do anything wrong, but I know my buddy screwed up and I don't want to get him blamed. Or I remember one time I was at a place where the investigators would tend to make the investigation blame the equipment, because if they knew that if they found a person had made a mistake, well, that was going to result in discipline. So, well, we don't want to do that. We'll just find equipment that caused it.
Yeah, you can't. If you fire equipment, that's just replacing it.
What do you do you can't fire the equipment? You just replace it.
Yeah. So we want to look at the why after the what. What are the steps that kind of go into understanding the what? What's essential in understanding the what?
Well, okay. So you're trying to develop a sequence of events, and more than likely that's going to require you to interview people, and I always think people always go into interviews asking questions, but it really should be getting people to tell their story. And yeah, you probably have to ask a question to get them started, but you're asking a question like, okay, you're getting them ease, you introduce yourself, you find out where they work, how long have you worked here, just as simple to ask questions. And then you're going back and saying, well, why don't you tell me what happened that day from wherever you think the best starting point is, all the way through whatever you observed, whatever you saw, step by step, all the way until, well, the incident happened, and maybe even a little bit after that about what they did to recover. And just tell me the whole story, and I'll try not to interrupt. And then you got to shut up and let the other person tell their story, no matter how, I don't want to say no matter how far they wander afield, but you really want to be quiet and let them go and let them tell their story. And what you may find is you may have questions about their story, but you can't jump in and ask questions in the middle of them telling their story, because every time you ask a question, you're getting them out of their storytelling mode, going through the sequence of events in their brain, and they're having to then say, oh, what did he say? What did he do? And they lose track of where they are.
I always describe it to people like you're walking in a big field of grass, and with memory, you've walked that path. You can kind of tell where it went. And every time you're getting somebody to go back through that path, if you interrupt them, it's like you came up and kicked them into the grass, and they're following around and stumbling to get back, and they lose information and they lose sequence getting back onto that pathway. So they're stumbling around. Now we've got our sequence of events. We've got an understanding of what happened.
Well, you've got a first
understanding.
Yeah, and then you've got to take other people's interviews and other information. For instance, you may collect physical evidence that helps you with that sequence of events. You may decide, oh, there's things that I didn't know about that I need to go ask questions about. You may need to get technical people involved because you don't understand why this thing worked the way it did. You may have to get equipment reliability people involved or maintenance people involved. Say, hey, why'd this break the way it did? Wasn't it supposed to do such and such and it didn't? Why didn't the automatically shut it down? Whatever it is. And so this is going to cause you to go back and do other things. So let's say now you've got all the information and you're going to lay it out. and you really want to lay it out in a visual manner that you can show somebody and they can go, oh yeah, I understand that. That's right. So now you understand the what. So the next thing you got to do is
Why? Do I get it? Why?
you get to go from what happened, how it happened. That's a little bit more toward the why thing, right? You never get to ask the question why. But you need something to take you from what we'd call causal factors, things that went wrong, mistakes that were made, equipment that failed, whatever, and go from there to why did it fail? Why was there a mistake made? There's your whys. But you need something that gets you past your current knowledge, because what people have for a tendency is they tend to jump on their favorite cause. It's like maybe your favorite cause is human error. Well, once I found human error, I'm done.
So another essential element then is to find what was missing from your system that allowed these things to go down. Is that the way you would kind of say this as essential is to find what's missing, what missing best practice, missing piece of knowledge?
Yeah, I'd say that. I'd agree with that.
'Cause
and then how do you fix that, right? If it may have been a human factors kind of thing, where you're going to say, well, that kind of a display led to this kind of an error. It may have been a procedures thing. Well, if you write your procedures that way, you could expect these kind of errors. It may have been a communications related thing where if you and I sit and talk and
if we shared the right information,
if we don't ever come to agreement on what we're doing, we may have a problem. There's lots of things that you need to go look for, and your root cause system should help guide you to those things and get you to ask more questions and get you to do a thorough job at looking at all the possibilities that could cause mistakes to occur.
So I think a big, point of separation between techniques comes down to bias. And it's really the investigator's knowledge. So if you look at you have a very limited amount of best practice knowledge that you, through your work experience, gain. So I might, if I spent years in equipment troubleshooting or maintenance reliability, I might have a really good knowledge of maintenance best practices, methods for troubleshooting equipment issues, but I may not have any, human factors training. So those kind of experiences bias me to look at specific best practices and say, oh, we should be applying those. I think a good technique and a good system should push you away from biases, or it includes those, but it also gives you things that are outside of your knowledge scope, so that instead of me just having to have all of the answers in my head and I have to figure out how to fit them into a system, the system should be taking what I know and using that knowledge and experience to help me push me beyond and guide me down to best practices I might not have thought of.
I'll go one more on that. Even if you're an expert, you tend to have your favorites. So my favorite is management system causes. I come in and do your investigation, you can be sure all the management system causes are going to be identified. What's my unfavorite? I tend not to look for supervisory issues. I don't know why that is in my brain, but it is. So I need a system that gets me to go look for those things and all the other things that could be potentials. But I definitely know I want it to remind me about management system things. I don't want to get lost in the grass and not get back to look at those. But on the other hand, I want to get all the things. And so even though I'm an expert in it, even if I knew everything there was to know, I'm still going to tend as a human to pick my favorites. I guess I'd say you've got favorite causitis or whatever. You're going to look for those first or look for those maybe exclusively and not even realize you're doing it. So you need something that breaks you out of that focus on what your favorites are and gets you to consider the whole plethora of various potential root causes.
So an essential technique is to find the missing best practices, but we need techniques that are going to help us remove investigator bias. We need techniques that are going to help us go beyond what we already know, and the things that we do know help make sure that we're being thorough and we're not skipping opportunities for improvement.
That's it exactly.
Now, a lot of techniques stop there. You've found your root causes. Good luck.
A lot of techniques don't get there.
Don't get there, but even still, they get you to a root cause.
You find a root cause. I hate that, but yes, let's say you find
a root
cause, which is human error, and what do? We'll punish the guy to make sure that never happens again.
So I think you need to.
No one admits it again.
An essential technique is to fix the problem you found versus fix the thing you want to fix. So to me, you've got to go away from, you
think an investigator would have something in their mind they want to correct before they even get to the root causes?
I think investigators frequently have a hammer that they've had in their pocket and they've been looking for a nail the whole time.
All right.
So I think there are oftentimes common things that people want to fix or feel comfortable fixing, and they need help getting away from those. They need help looking for.
Well, those might be fine.
That might be
a fine thing.
That might be a good hammer.
But are there other things that they need besides a hammer? Might be the question.
So, I think about, I had a client in the course I was teaching last week, and they had an incident where somebody didn't report something. And not only did this person not report it, but the next person didn't report it, and the next shift didn't report it, and it went through, I think they had 36 occurrences of people seeing this problem and not reporting it. And they had that over a series of, I think, 3 days. And it's something that that we know they interacted with, but they didn't report it. And some systems would say, you've got to write all those people up. They're to blame. They should have said something.
Gosh, you got to write up 33 people. That's a lot of people to write
More
up.
than 33.
I think we'll just cover this up and we won't even get to say that it happened.
So you get something like that where it's like, oh, we've got to really make a statement of they've got to follow this. And I think, we want to get people, we obviously have to hold people accountable for the things they are responsible for. But I think there's also a point where management has to say, hey, look, we've created
If 33 people didn't report it, it's not just one person.
Exactly. We've created a cultural element here, and we have to do something different. So the conversation with that group became, okay, how can we change and encourage behavior? And so that's not something, everybody has an expertise on. So how do I get something that's going to help me with that?
I don't know. I think everybody has an expertise on that. It's always punishment or maybe some training. Training or punishment, and maybe write a procedure. You can get all three of the standard 3 corrective actions in there, and that covers it. They signed that last report we sent up with those 3 in it, didn't they? Well, they'll probably sign this one too.
Yeah. That's this discipline, training, and
write a procedure.
Rewrite the procedure.
Make it longer. Make that procedure longer.
So we had a conversation in there, which was, not just how do we use the stick, but what's the real carrot? Why do people not follow this rule? What can they think about it, and how do they approach that? So that's one element, but that's one problem. There's a ton of different things that people need help with when it comes to corrective actions.
So I would say people need help being creative when it comes to corrective actions, because most people don't have all the different types of corrective actions instantly available in their brain, and they probably do have corrective actions they've seen in the past that worked, or in the past that got approved by management, or that they're familiar with, and those are going to be the top on their list, right? And so that list is not going to be an extensive list. That list is going to be a pretty short list for most people. And so you're right. You're going to have to do something to help people develop good corrective actions to prevent these things from happening again. Even if they find the root causes, they may not develop good corrective actions, which you talking about a course a long time ago that I was teaching. I remember we taught these people, and they discovered that they had it was a labeling issue. they had no labels on these valves, and the guys were supposed to track down, instead of going and verifying the labels right on that valve and opening the valve, they had to track down where the fluid was coming from, and then this is the right valve to open, right? That was their
Trace all those lines.
trace all those lines. Well, they weren't doing that. They knew which valve was which, but they occasionally made mistakes. So they said, oh, it's labels need to be improved, was one of the root causes. And then their corrective action was tell people to be more careful when they find things that aren't labeled. And the be more careful is not a very effective corrective action. But they couldn't see that things would be labeled because they never saw things that were labeled. So it was beyond their scope of things that could be done that you really could label valves out in the field, and they just couldn't see it.
And I think a lot of people struggle. We show off the safeguard hierarchy for what's the most effective, least effective safeguards, and it's a good illustration of what's the things we should be focusing on. But when you get people to start trying to think of how do we reduce the hazard, a lot of times people's brains start with all the reasons they can't do an action. Oh, we can't change this because it's going to cost money. Or, oh, we can't do this because this is how we've always done it. We have to have this hazard. We've got to have this bad chemical.
Or there's no way all the valves could be labeled. There's no way that can happen.
There's so many valves.
Yeah, we can't do that.
So they start off with these things of, oh, we can't do that, instead of going, well, what would be the most effective thing that we should do? And how do we, propose the most effective corrective actions? It's not our responsibility to say we won't do something. That's leadership's responsibility. We're going to present out the best possible things that we can be doing. And if leadership says, hey, we don't have the budget for it this year, well, then we can move down that to the next effective.
So what do people do if they don't have these techniques? Let's say they're using 5 whys now. 5 whys doesn't have a sequence of events, doesn't have the what first. So what do? Just ask what 5 times and then ask why 5 times? What do you do?
You fill out the paperwork and submit it quickly. That's oftentimes what happens when
Where's the spin-a-cause? We got a spin-a-cause up behind you. So you take that spin-a-cause, give it a spin, and what'd you get?
I got act of God, pray for a solution.
Oh, there you go. Effective corrective action right there. It gives you the root cause and the corrective action. You think that's the best system to use?
No, my favorite one on here is asleep.
Wake up employee
and fire.
Yep.
Everybody always likes those.
That's a good one.
I hand those out.
That's what they really do. That's a real corrective action there. So the answer is you're going to need some techniques that go beyond asking why 5 times. You're going to need to understand what happened and get that down. I'll call it down on paper, although it could be in software, that you can look at and see that sequence of events. You then have to be able to understand what the causal factors are. And what I mean by that is there's usually more than one thing that went wrong that led to a serious incident or even a precursor incident. There's usually more thing that went wrong, and each one of those has root causes. So it's not the root cause of the incident, it's the root cause of the causal factors or root causes of the causal factors. So you might have multiple causal factors. Each of those might have multiple root causes. So number one, you may have more than one root cause, obviously, right? And once you have those root causes, or what are the things that we could correct that would keep this from happening again, then you got to develop good corrective actions. Well, first off, you got to get led through the process to get to what those root causes are, and not just your favorite cause. And then you have to be able to say, okay, I found these root causes, how do I fix them? And you really should have something that helps you develop good, effective corrective actions based on the best knowledge we have today. And of course, in the future, if there's new things come up, we could add that to the thing we use, and boom, we we now have things to fix.
So in TapRooT, what's the minimum required for root cause analysis?
I think the minimum thing required is that you have a tool that takes you through the what happened process. And in TapRooT, that's a snap chart. And then you identify your causal factors. You decide, hey, is there anything here? Is this, if this was a big accident, you know you're going to go on and do the rest of the process. But if this was a minor incident, you decide, hey, is this a burnt out light bulb? Is this something we don't really need to put a bunch of investigative effort into, and we can just stop at this point and
Maybe there's nothing more to learn here.
there's nothing more to learn here. You just stop. Or you say, I want to go on. Well, then you're going to take those causal factors. You're going to use something called the root cause tree for each one of those causal factors and find out why that happened. What are the root causes? Then you're going to take those root causes and you're going to say, what's an effective way to fix this? You can use your hierarchy of controls there to say, these would be the most effective fixes. I think I want to do this. Or maybe it's a simple incident. Maybe I'm going to take some easy fixes and do the easy ones. It's always possible sometimes to do the easy stuff.
You can have the corrective action helper guide to help you figure out some of the easy things you can do.
Yes, that's right. And that's what you have. That's the corrective action helper guide to help you develop the corrective actions. And those are the really essential things within TapRooT you use, I'd like to say, every time. Every time you're using those. And that's the minimum you can use, because at a minimum you need to know what happened. You need to know the causal factors and why they happened. And you need to develop some corrective actions if you've gone on beyond that causal factor point, to say, hey, here's how I'm going to keep this from happening again. Those are the minimum. And a lot of times people would ask me, it's almost like, what's the least I can do to find root causes? And the answer is, well, it's good. You don't want to waste a bunch of time doing things you don't have to do. But the first thing is this worth investigating at all? And that's the question you're going to ask after you collect some information and say, is there anything to learn here? If it is worth investigating, then it's worth investigating well, because you're preventing something expensive, a fatality, a big quality issue, a big equipment failure from happening in the future. And that's worth doing well.
Now, beyond the minimum, we talked at the beginning of this about the different goals of RCAs based on kind of what you're investigating. So if you're doing a major investigation, does that have a minimum that's different than a lower to medium risk?
I think the minimum is still there. The question is, what else are you going to need? So, we talked about different ways to do interviews. You're going to need to have very effective interviews, because if you've got a big accident or something big that went wrong, people are going to be, you can say there's no blame involved, but hey, we just had an accident where somebody lost their hand and there was a bunch of damage done, and everybody's worried. Everybody's worried about getting blamed. They're worried about looking like they're the one who caused it. I've heard so many of these. They may be, if somebody got killed, they're going to be working. Well, they're going to get blamed, and they're going to lose their workers' comp coverage because they're at fault for this. And if they're at fault, they don't get, their widow doesn't get the insurance policy or whatever. And so there's a lot of potential for blame in these big ones. So you better be really good at doing your interviews. You better be really good at backing up your interviews with collected evidence that proves that it did happen that way. And you better be really good at doing that root cause analysis and developing your corrective actions. Those are all the same, but you may opt for some of the optional techniques. We talk about change analysis, critical human action profile, safeguards analysis is sort of built into the system, but it's another one you can use. Let's see, Equifactor for equipment related stuff.
If it's equipment related, you may need to go into that.
Yep. And all those potentially could be used on a smaller investigation too, but you mainly save those tools besides Equifactor for big investigations.
I think one difference, though, between...
Did I say change analysis?
You did. You
Okay.
did. I think one difference from a minimum for major investigations versus a minimum for, let's say, medium or lower risk would be generic cause. Now we haven't talked much about
Well, we haven't
that.
talked much about
And I don't know
this
that
is
we...
almost beyond the scope of this conversation.
It probably is, but I would say, when we think about really major investigations, you can't just focus on the minute, it happened here.
Well, let's explain what a generic cause is. So you get down to root causes, and let's go with that label example. Labels need to be improved. Well, then you might go back and say, well, why don't we have labels? Why do we have things that don't have labels on them? And then you're talking about, well, we don't have a design standard that when we build a new factory or build a new unit or modify a unit that says things should be labeled and how they should be labeled. And not only that, but we never train anybody to look for labels. And so, we don't have labels. They aren't there from the design. The operators don't even recognize they need labels. We may not have references to labels in the procedure. So you got to look at all these things that branch out from that. Oh, there's no label on this valve. And we got a whole bunch of other valves that aren't labeled. Oh, we got to get them fixed too. And that becomes a lot bigger scope then on that generic cause. And maybe you don't do that for simple incidents, but you probably do need to do it if it's been a big major accident.
Yeah, so it's definitely, does this exist anywhere else? And when we think about, for major incidents, if that's high risk and that high potential exists somewhere else, we need to be looking to see, does this best practice that we're missing exist?
We don't want to have 6 or 8 of these just so we can find all the places where this could occur.
Exactly. So I think there is some difference when it comes to risk level. Like you said, if it's an equipment type issue, maybe minimum is to have that Equifactor component be a part of that. So there is a little bit of difference of what's the minimum based on that goal of what we're doing for investigations. But I think you're right. You've got to have those 4 key elements of understanding what happened with the snap chart, looking at where your system broke down and identifying causal factors, looking for those missing best practices that would have prevented those causal factors, and finding creative ways to implement those best practices in effective ways in your system. So I think if you've got those 4 elements in your investigation, you're really going to have a much better response to incidents, but you're also going to find that you don't have as many incidents because you're going to be fixing problems in the long run.
Well, that's the whole goal, isn't it? Is to improve performance, reduce risk, reduce repeat equipment failures, not have fatalities, not have serious injuries, not have stuff go outside the factory that's not within our quality specs. All the things that we want to have not happen, and have good, reliable performance is what we want. And that's hard to do.
And if I wanted to do that, where would I go to learn how to do that?
Well, I always recommend going to a 5-day course because it's the most complete course we have, and people get a lot of practice using these techniques. But we also have a 3-day virtual course and a 2-day course that you can attend that gets you the essentials. What we've talked about is the things minimum you need. That's covered in those courses. I always think somebody who's going to do a lot of investigations, though, is going to go do serious investigations too. And if you're going to do those, you ought to go to the 5-day course.
So they can check out our public courses on our store page, or we can come on site to help them fit in with their schedule, go to the location. I know we've had people going up into the Arctic Circle all the way to South America, Asia, etc. We go all around the world.
I've been lots of places. I've been up there to Kaparik, and boy, I don't know, further south would have to probably be when I went to Thailand, probably. But you never know where you're going to end up teaching a course, because people use this all over the world.
So if you want to learn more, you can check out the links below. Also look for subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you can find out whenever we post a podcast. Lastly, you should check us out on social media. We're on basically all the social media areas. I also want to hear from you guys. So comment below, what do you think are the essential elements to root cause analysis.
Do you disagree with us? Do
Do
you
you-
think 5 whys is wonderful and it is all the essential elements?
We want to hear your opinion. Put them below. And thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.